would like first to thanks to the organizers for this opportunity and for Professor Heinz. This project is done with the cooperation of Professor Heinz and Professor Belitsky-Serussi from the Hebrew University. My name is Tal Geffen. I came here 6 years ago to pursue my doctorate in neuroscience, studying schizophrenia. In this way, I am part of the department. The project I'll be telling you about today actually began partly here in this auditorium. That's what's making giving this presentation in this setting, in the front of the department, particularly exciting. It's also tricky because you are the subject matter. And when I first arrived, I didn't have special knowledge about the department's history. But this auditorium, with its portraits above me, of Jewish staff members who worked here in the 30s and were later expelled, these portraits stir something in me. They created a strange feeling, though not necessarily a negative one. It might be called in German unheimlich or uncanny in the Freudian sense. That means familiar and strange at the same time and creates feeling of discomfort. To me, it felt as if these spaces were asking me what I was doing here. For context, I am third and fourth generation to the Holocaust on both sides. But this feeling quickly transformed into something else. I began wondering what this meant for the people sitting beside me in this auditorium, my colleagues here in the department. Think of this research as taking a snapshot in time, capturing where collective memory about the 30s and 40s stand within this very specific group of people. Psychologists, psychiatrists, nurses, researchers, and social workers working in our department today. While I'm curious about what people know about the department's history, I'm particularly interested whether this history feels relevant to them. After all, so much time has passed. And if it is relevant, how does it manifest? Does it influence decision-making, emotional responses, or other aspects of the work? The clinic, From historical perspective, during the Nazi Party's regime, the department's activities included the sterilization of psychiatric patients, dismissal of Jewish staff and regime opponents, and the transfer of some psychiatric patients from Charité to other clinics, from where they were sent to examination as part of Action T4 euthanasie program. These actions were not unique compared to other clinics in Germany active during the Third Reich. From the commemorative perspective, what is unique is the department's decision to reveal this history in a very prominent way. There are several of what I call memory objects in the department. Those are physical installations that actively mediate institutional memory and encourage engagement with the past. Since 2008, an exhibition at the department's entrance has dealt with this history. One of its prominent captions from Nuremberg doctor's trial in 1946 reads, "The beginning was a subtle shift in the basic attitude of the doctors." This sentence, written in large letters at the entry to the department, appears to be directed at current medical staff. External visitors from the nearby Charité Medical Museum, as well as patients, pass by this exhibition on their way to the wards. Moreover, above me, the auditorium displays large portraits of Jewish doctors who were dismissed from their work hanging above the speaker's podium. No other department in Charité has chosen to expose its difficult past in such a prominent way. I look at the study in the field of memory studies using an anthropological, phenomenological approach, focusing on the lived experience of the people I'm studying. More specifically, the focus here is on difficult past. I like the definition of Belitsky-Serussi here. What constitutes a difficult past is not necessarily the tragedy per se, but an inherent moral trauma, disputes, tensions, and conflicts. Within this framework, the study is positioned in the field of German memory studies post-World War II. Major researchers in German collective memory, such as Jeffrey Olick and Alida Assmann, have elucidated the transition from initial phases of denial and suppression, focusing primarily on Western Germany, to later efforts of memorialization and commemoration. The work predominantly examines the dynamics of collective memory within the public sphere using the different sources of media, archives, etc. In contrast, Herald Walser emphasized the need to study personal narratives. He highlighted a significant gap. While the German education system produces graduates who are very knowledgeable about World War II, the personal narratives within families tell a different story. He noted the equivalent tendency to portray the ancestors as, at the very least, not supporting Nazism, and sometimes even aiding persecuted Jews. As revealed through interviews, these narratives are transferred between generations and often not aligned with historical reality. When it comes to institutional memory, while there is extensive historical research about how universities, hospitals, and commercial companies operated and changed during the Nazi regime, there are relatively few studies about how these institutions deal with and engage with their historical memory today. Based on online research and conversation with scholars in relevant fields, including Professor Heinz, who heads our psychiatric department, Professor Kluge heads of transcultural psychiatric group, Professor Beddings, historian here at Charité, and Professor Zimmermann, who studies German and German Jewish history, there appears to be no existing research about how workers in institutions with a difficult past relate their workplace history to their current practice. This is particularly true for institutions that still serve their original functions from the 30s and 40s, like here. This gap exists in both medical and non-medical institutions and represent an important missing piece in our understanding of how historical awareness affects contemporary medical practice. Since the department has chosen to expose its past in such a prominent way, it is an ideal setting to discuss these questions with the staff. Regarding timing, among the population of German origin, there is an opportunity to interview staff members, some of whom had or have direct connection to family members who lived during the war. This is something that becomes more rare with the years, and likely this type of research will become less relevant in not too many years from now. This study presents an exceptional opportunity made possible through the full cooperation of the psychiatric department, a particularly significant aspect given the sensitive nature of this research. The study addressed the following questions. First, how does the representation of the past in the psychiatry department take part in the practice, experience, and professional identity of the employees in the department today? The next question is specification of the first one. Are there any associations between representation of the past and current ethical or professional dilemmas among the employees, and if so, which ones? And last, how do employees interpret and engage with the department's institutional efforts to address and educate about its difficult past? These questions are often interpreted differently depending on identity components: German origin versus immigration background, professional role, generation, and West versus East German background. The data for this project is still being collected. So far, 18 interviews in German and English have been conducted with department staff members, and several more interviews are planned with people who designed the exhibitions. In this sense, there are no final conclusions yet. In these interviews, I asked whether there are points where the past is present or reflected in practice, and whether there is something in the department's daily life that triggers this in one way or another. Based on the assumptions that a person's background and family history influence their beliefs and perceptions, I also asked about this aspect if the participant is willing to answer. I mentioned earlier the definition of difficult past as one characterized by moral trauma, tensions, and conflicts. This was surely true for the interviews, and moreover, these interviews are conducted within the department, even if anonymously. Due to these factors, there is an inherent complexity in the interviews, yet many interviews were very open. I will share some voices that emerged from the interviews that touch directly on the research questions. This is the original text with very minimal editing. I indicate the real age and profession. The gender is not necessarily preserved. I find this text powerful, which is why I decided to present them. Let me share one of the interviews that illustrate how the past influenced current practice. This comes from a female psychiatrist of German origin in her mid-30s. My question was whether she thinks that the historical background of the department affects her or the department in some way. A provides a concrete example in relation to contraception and clearly refers to past sterilization. She believes that during crises such as COVID-19, it might be beneficial for some vulnerable female patients, particularly with psychosis, to avoid conceiving children due to the complex general and personal situation. She says that contraceptives such as injections are discussed with patients when they are well enough. These methods are seen as beneficial because they do not require daily attention and are effective for a month or 3. She adds, and from here on, those are her exact words. I think sometimes, maybe I'm even worried to come too close to the border of these horrible things that used to happen. And I think these kinds of patients are super vulnerable. Like, sometimes they might also agree to things that they don't understand 100%. Interviewer, but just to try to make it precise. So when you say that you have, as the doctor, this complexity here, could you put the finger where it starts? A, it definitely has something to do with the history, I think, because I know that in the past there definitely were incidences where females were sterilized. Maybe even for, I don't know, for obviously ridiculous reasons, like they thought it was like a genetic disease and they shouldn't pass it on. They didn't have, I think, the female health in mind, which is what we have in mind. But I think sometimes I'm maybe worried that even though I don't want to, I might somehow cross a line. Interviewer, and do you think that maybe from the other side you might be overly careful? A, maybe. Interviewer, usually? A, maybe, it's possible. Maybe other people would say that's ridiculous, that you can have a 3-month contraceptive shot. End of quote. What makes A's interview particularly significant is how it demonstrates a distinctive personal connection between current medical decisions and the department's history. Rather than maintaining emotional distance, she explicitly worries about coming too close to past atrocities. Her perspective stands out among other interviews conducted, as other respondents often maintained a more detached personal stance toward the historical legacy of the department. What I aim to create in the analysis ultimately is kind of a spectrum, where when I speak with staff of German origin, one can place the conversation at a point ranging from, on one side, the ability to locate personal experience in a place of closeness and dialogue with history from a personal angle. This example I brought, for instance, is located on the dialogic side of the spectrum. On the other side of the spectrum, there is a distancing, meaning an experience where the historical narrative is not connected or less connected to the individual. My interest is not just in historical knowledge or the level of knowledge. This is important and it's precondition, but my interest in the personal experience in relation to the department's history. My pre-assumption is that there is a connection between this ability to reflectively look on history and to locate the subject within the broader historical context in order to develop a deep sense of historical memory. In that regard, let's look on the second quote that relates to memory culture in Germany and the positioning of the exhibition in the clinic in that context. Interviewing B, a psychologist in his mid-30s of German origin, he works as a researcher in the clinic and as a therapist outside of the clinic and shares his views on transgenerational patterns. Through his psychological dynamic perspective, he suggested that understanding a person's thoughts and behaviors requires examining how these patterns evolved within their family. In the German context, while he gently explores family history with some of his patients through questions about their parents and grandparents, he notes that most German patients don't have limited knowledge of their family past. Our conversation then shifted to broader aspect of German memory culture. Starting quote. B. I feel like, in Germany we are told that we have a very great memory culture. That's what we're told we have. But I feel like it's paradox, because I feel in Germany people are told to remember something that they don't know anything about. And it's hard to remember something you never knew. My impression is just going through the motions without really making anything stick. If you do sport and if you are playing basketball and you are just pretending to throw a ball, that's something called just going through the motions. And I feel like this memory culture in Germany is the same. I don't feel like it's drilled deep enough into the people. End of quotation. Discussing the exhibition in the clinic in context with what he perceives of German memory culture and the lack of drilling, he explains that the exhibition did not catch his attention. He would prefer to focus more on individual figures, which he thinks would increase the emotional impact for him. The view of Beyond the exhibition is critical, as he sees it as representative of broader public memory practices, which he thinks ultimately preserve the gap between institutionalized public awareness and the largely missing personal memory. And now for the last interview. It is very interesting to hear voices of employees outside of the German original population. Sometimes they can come out as outside observers with valuable insights, and in other cases, such as the next quote, they see themselves also as from the other side, as the other side of this dialogue. So, she is a male psychologist from the department with an immigration background. He expressed high identification with the expelled Jewish doctors and wondered how his colleagues would behave in escalating situations. Interviewer, can you describe me the auditorium? See. Oh, I'm gonna get emotional and has a few tears in his eyes. It was very uncomfortable, to be honest. I was there recently for the first time. After a while, I looked up and I saw these portraits, and it made me kind of uncomfortable. It makes me mistrust the people a little bit. I'm like sitting there and going like, so if shit hits the fan, are my colleagues that I'm sitting with now, are they going to protect me? It's very weird to be confronted with it. And it's like pretty big portraits. They built a life and then they were just kicked out. End of quote. Later, she explained that before 2015, with Pegida demonstrations against non-Western immigration in Germany, he would not be bothered by it. But his perception of Germany changed after it. In his interview, C projects on the portraits his own fears of being with migration background. From a theoretical perspective, the portraits might function for C as what Pierre Noah terms sites of memory, as a space where he connects the past with the present. One of Noah's key characteristics of sites of memory relates to the sites where there was a break with the past, that is to say, a moment of historical discontinuity. These portraits function differently for various staff members. Not all interviewees even recognize them as Jewish staff members. Rather than serving a shared collective memory, these portraits act for some of the interviewees more similar to something like a Rorschach test, when they project their own concerns and fears into them. C mentioned that he's mainly staying with this theme on his own and find it hard to discuss with others in the clinic, highlighting the individual, present absent character of this site of memory. Finally, let me address why this research matters. So, most studies in institutions with difficult past focus on archival materials rather than living experiences. By examining personal narratives, this research offers something new, a window into how people actively engage with and navigate their institution's historical legacy. As far as I know, no similar study has been conducted in Germany at all, making this investigation particularly significant. From the perspective of medical ethics, this research examines the complex interplay between commemorative practices and their actual impact within the department. It addresses fundamental questions about how institutional memory shapes current dynamics concerning racism, anti-Semitism, and psychiatric patient care. This is relevant not only for historical accountability, but also for contemporary ethical practices within the hospital, for the patients, and inside the team. So, if there are any additional questions inside, I will be very happy to hear them. If anyone is still interested in participating or knows someone who might also be interested in participating, also people who worked in the department, you are more than welcome to contact me. I would like to mention the people who initiated the exhibition: Professor Heinz, Professor Goldman, Professor Priester, Professor Hess, Professor Bedis, and Professor Einhäutel. I would like to thank Professor Heinz for supporting this project from the beginning, and for Priska Helger for co-conducting the German interviews. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kai Geffen. Kai Geffen asked me to open this short discussion to make it possible for you to ask questions, to give comments, and I would like to invite you to do so. Yes.
This This is a really fascinating study. Did you get the sense that for patients it could be traumatic or triggering to learn about the past? Did you get a sense for whether they had negative reactions? I mean, that's one thing I would worry about.
It's very interesting. So it's really interesting, and it comes. So I hear it not from patients. I interview only the staff, but sometimes I speak with the staff, like how they perceive patients, also in regards to the basically this exhibition, because they are also passing there, and also if it somehow comes out. Let's say that people here with psychosis, for instance. So there are different perspectives between the staff. There is not like one voice, but it's also things that sometimes comes out when some of the staff or some people that I spoke with definitely has perspectives that the patients are aware to the history of this place, and it might come out sometimes, like particularly in that regard to talk about psychosis and things like that, but not all agreed. So there was no just like voice in that.
Thank you very much, Andreas. Hans?
I would just like to add that there were two colleagues from the States who helped us tackle the whole topic of the Nazi past in this hospital, and one of them is here. That's from Crystal, and I would also like to mention that David Goldman was also involved, and he came actually to a meeting with the then chairs of neurology and patients and relatives to discuss that. So I just wanted to say David can't come because of the travel ban, but Tom is here, and I wanted to say thank you to you both.
Thank you.
Michael Graf has a comment or question?
Thank you for this wonderful presentation. I was wondering whether you're, you're investigating people in a current workplace confronted with the past of that workplace, but whether you're also, you mentioned it in the introduction, whether you're also considering people's own historical context, and maybe even whether that to some degree influenced their work choice.
Yeah.
In fact, yeah.
So yes, like I try. Usually, like I start like with the interviews basically with how they perceive like all these installations, memory objects in the department, and if they let me. And I also ask about personal background because, as I said, I assume it strongly influences. And most of the cases, what was surprised for me is that almost in most of the cases, people were open to share, and this was also really fascinating to hear. And of course, I assume it's also really influenced, and also this kind of differences between West and East Germany, and also I think age really plays here a huge role. Yeah.
We have time for one or two more questions if there are any. Okay, so thank you very much again. Before we close, just short closing remarks.